Yes, madam.
Did you have problems with the hovercraft when you filmed Night of the Spiders?
Oh, my
Something
God.
about you wiping out.
Did I have problems with the hovercraft? Yeah, you see, Barry, my producer, he was under the impression that I was a sort of mechanical magic man that could do anything, because it so happens that I do fly, and I used to race motorbikes and cars and boats in proper racing. And so Barry said, well, John can drive anything, a tank or a lorry or a... So when I used to ring him up and say, Barry, I've just seen the most marvelous new gadget, you know, a motorbike that folds up into a briefcase, or I've seen a little tiny hovercraft. He said, great. Well, where is it? I'd say, down at the boat show in Olympia. He said, I'll go and see it. And he'd go and see it, and he'd ring me up and say, terrific, all arranged, it'll be in the next Doctor Who. So he'd write it in. So in the Planet of the Spiders, have you all seen the Planet of the Spiders? In the Planet of the Spiders, Barry promised me an hour and a half's practice on a hovercraft. Now, a hovercraft, as you know, it has a lifting propeller which lifts it up, and it has another propeller which pushes it forward, and it has a fin at the back, and the fin at the back is supposed to steer it. I say supposed to, because I didn't find that it did very successfully. It also has no brakes, of course, and if you just let it down on the ground, it turns over on the back of your neck, where you are then decapitated by a propeller right behind you. So it's a rather dodgy piece of machinery. So Barry said, don't worry, I'll give you plenty of time to practice. Now, we had a hill on the banks of the River Severn, and there was a bank that went up to the hillock, and he put a camera there, and he put a camera there, and he said, you come down the river, and you turn up, and you go over the river bank, and there will be Stuart Fell, one of the greatest stuntmen in England, who will be sitting dressed as an old tramp and eating his sandwiches, and he'll just go, oh, like this, and he'll lie back, and as he lies back, you'll come over the top and go right over the top of him in the hovercraft. I said, right, no problem. All right, Stu? So he said, right, and he had confidence in me as well, to begin with. Now, I got into this, I said, right, well, I'm going to have an hour and a half's practice. Wrong. I got no practice. I kept saying to Barry, can I go now? I said, no, I need you for the next shot. And this went on and on and on and on. He said, right, ready for the hovercraft shot. And I said, hang about. I've never driven the damn thing. He said, you'll be right, easy, you know, go on. So I got in it, and I drove it up the river, and I turned it round, and I said, well, it seems to be all right. I mean, I've got lift, and that's permanent, and I've got speed, which I can adjust with a lever. So I won't go too quick, but I'll need a little bit of push to get up over the bank and get over Stuart. And it was all done with signals when I was just coming. They said, Stuart, down, and he'd go. So I drove it down like this, and I came up like this in between the two cameras. Unfortunately, there was a very strong crosswind blowing, and the result was that instead of going between the cameras, I wiped out the whole camera crew on the left. I knocked them all out of the tip. They flew all over the place. They could have been very dangerous, because you've got this propeller, albeit it is covered in, but you know, the cover could have come off or something. But I wiped out the whole crew. I knocked them flying. So Barry said, well, that wasn't very good. And I said, well, of course it wasn't very good. I tried the thing. He said, well, go on. And he said, set the camera. I said, right now, anybody that's not wanted in this crew, go over there. So I said, right. He said, are you ready? He said, right. And they waved flags, and I went right down. I said, now this time I'm going to allow for that wind. I'm going to come well upstage a bit. And I came down, and I went flat out up, and there was no wind whatsoever, and I wiped up this camera. By this time they were getting, you know, a bit short of cameras. The ambulance men were almost going on strike. They were getting so they have elastoplast fitted and so on. But in the meantime, Stuart Fell got the real jitters, the stuntman, and he was like this, you know, he didn't really think I was ever coming. And eventually I went over the top of him with the third shot, and I managed to make it this time, and we went over the top of him, and Larry said, right, okay, come on back. What a stupid remark. First of all, I couldn't hear him with the noise this thing was making. Secondly, I hadn't the faintest idea how you stop him. And so we went sailing off down this field. And I was going, whoo, and I was turning the steering wheel, and the thing went like this. And I wasn't going to let it down on the ground, because I knew that it would go over, because I was going too quickly. But eventually I finished up against a very large oak. But it's about 3/4 of a mile down the field. And there I sort of sat in it and waited. Obviously people came and rescued me. Extremely dodgy moment.
You stopped them by hitting camera.
Yeah. Yes, at the back.
How how did your costume come about?
My costume came about, well, I was asked to do a photographic call for the Radio Times, for the front cover of the Radio Times. And I didn't know what to wear, really. I always wanted to wear a sort of Nehru suit, rather like Roger Delgado wore, you know, with a high collar. Something very elegant and probably in white or in black, and things which eventually I gave the idea to Roger, and he looked great in it. His black hair, that beard, those eyes, and the gloves he always wore. But they didn't like the idea of my wearing that. They thought it was too severe. And they were in such a rush to get me to wear something for this photo call. So I said, well, does it really matter what I wear? And he said, no, wear what you like. And so I borrowed from my old wardrobe of my family's, I borrowed my grandfather's Inverness cape, which is like this one that this young fellow's wearing here. They are, you know what they look like. They're just the top part is cape, the rest is a sort of straight cut coat. And I've got it still. And it had belonged to my grandfather, so I put that on, and that was scarlet line. And then I had a blue smoking jacket, because in those days, it was years ago, when you went away for a weekend to some shishi household, you dressed up at night. Instead of putting a dinner jacket on, you put a smoking jacket on. And you wore velvet slippers with your initials on them. You probably never seen it as silly and as shishi as that. But that's what people were inclined to do. So I had this jacket, and I wore the shirt, which was a Mr. Fish, who was a great designer then of shirts. I wore this white boil shirt with a frill, and I put this on. This is a joke, really. And stood like that, which is what my gesture always when I come in and do that. And I stood like that, and when I am the doctor, and bang, they took the picture, hit the front page of the Radio Times, and everybody said, ah, that's fantastic. And I said, well, you're joking. I mean, I can't wear that as doctor. And Peter Brown said, yes, you damn well are. And so I said, well, I'm not wearing my own clothes. He said, no, well, copy them. But I wore the cloak for my own original cloak, I think, for the first one. I think the first one. Did you see it today? Did you see it today? Yeah. Was it black with a red lining? Yeah, well, that was my grandfather said it's the original one. And then, if you remember, we explained it away in the show. I came out of the TARDIS dressed as Pat Troughton, which was extremely uncomfortable. I felt like singing in the Luton Girls' Choir. And I fell out, was then put into the hospital bed, remember, and then I escaped after we had that scene with the Brigadier, when he looked and he couldn't believe it was me, and I kept saying, it's me, Brigadier, and he said, no, 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 no. And I remember I looked in the mirror and said, no, new nose. Rather nice, really. And then I went into the changing room, remember, and I pinched all the clothes. And that's how we made the excuse. I pinched the cloak from that eccentric old man who came in. He saw him come in. I mean, that was only, the shot was only put in as an excuse to find out why there was a cloak like that and why there was that old car outside. So then I pinched this car, which was an English car called a Vauxhall 3098, a sort of a 1920s car. Beautiful machine, very, very fast. And I wanted to keep that for the show, but the owner wanted it back, and so we put the line in. The Brigadier said, if you remember, no, you can't have that, but I'll get you another one. And that's how Bessie came into being, and that's how I got the clothes that I wear.